Good afternoon. I'm just a little bit late. I apologize for that. We are going to cover our last session together, week 7, and we're going to cover tonight the 3 bonus chapters. We will probably spend about an hour and a half tonight. These chapters are very short. I did place some lecture notes for you for week 8. And you can find those in the on-campus web in the lecture notes section. These are pretty easy chapters to go through. I think that the text does a very good job of covering these 3 chapters, but I think it's useful to go through them because there are some very interesting topics that we need to talk about. And the first one we're going to talk about, bonus chapter A, working within the legal environment. Skip to the wrong one. These are our learning objectives for this chapter. Define business law, distinguish between statutory and common law, and explain the role of administrative agencies. Define tort law and explain the role of product liability in tort law. Identify the purposes and conditions of patents, copyrights, and trademarks. We've done a little bit of that early on, especially trademarks, not patents and copyrights. We talked about we talked about not so much copyrights, but brand names and things of that nature. And those fall under the general parameters, if you will, of copyright. Describe warranties and negotiable instruments as covered in the Uniform Commercial Code, which is, as far as I know or can remember, still used in 49 of the 50 states. It's not used in Louisiana, but there's something very similar in Louisiana. List and describe the conditions necessary to make a legally enforceable contract and describe the possible consequences if the contract is voided. Summarize several laws that regulate competition and protect consumers in the United States. Explain the role of tax laws in generating income for the government and as a method of discouraging or encouraging certain behaviors among taxpayers. Distinguish among the various types of bankruptcy as outlined by the Bankruptcy Code. And finally, explain the role of deregulation as a tool to encourage competition. Some would tell you deregulation has not been that great for consumers. All right. Why do we need laws? Well, I guess the best reason to say why we need laws is to give people some idea of what is acceptable behavior. And it's also something that the populace expects. We expect people to do certain things, and therefore we request our lawmakers, whether they be city councils or county councils or county commissions, state legislators or legislatures, or the United States Congress, to enact laws that cover certain types of behavior and certain types of things that we want protected. Now, it's interesting to note that the United States Constitution, which is the genesis of many laws in the United States, except for one amendment to the Constitution, I'll get to that in a second, did not forbid people to do anything. It mostly forbade the government to do certain things like illegal search and seizure, protection against cruel and unusual punishment, and things of that nature. The only amendment to the United States Constitution that forbade people to do things was the amendment that brought in prohibition, and it said to people you can't drink alcohol, you can't make alcohol, all this sort of stuff. And of course, that was subsequently rescinded about see, I think that law was passed in 1919, or that amendment passed in 1919, went into effect sometime in 1920 or 1921, and then was effectively rescinded by another amendment to the Constitution in 1933. So notice they're a key part of a civilized society, but they change with the times. And one of the problems that we're having today, especially when it comes to the internet, is that we're having a hard time defining what type of behavior is acceptable on the internet and what is not, what is considered to be criminal mischief and things of that nature. We're really having a hard time with that, and it's causing a lot of problems. Now, I don't mean that to be bad. It's just that's a statement of fact. So, as you know, the United States is made up of three branches of government: administrative, which are people like mayors, governors, and of course the President of the United States. And then each of those people have various people that work in their administrations, and that makes up the administrative part. Then we have the legislative, which is the city councils, commissions, state legislatures, and of course the United States Congress. And then last, not necessarily meant to be last, but a co-equal in the three pieces of government in the United States is the judiciary. And these folks oversee the legal system, and they make various and sundry decisions, sometimes called rulings, that affect all of us. And of course, the court system in the United States is made up of a number of parts, the chief being the United States Supreme Court, then the appellate courts that follow the Supreme Court, and then the district federal courts that follow the Supreme Court. That's on the federal side. Of course, there are other ones. We have immigration courts, we have bankruptcy courts, and other things in the federal system. Then, of course, we have state and local. There are essentially two types of courts. Trial courts, which will hear felony cases, if you will, criminal cases, and then civil law cases, and then appellate courts that hear appeals from the losing side in one of these type cases. And so they're made up of the ones we went through just a few seconds ago. Criminal law is set there, and we know that it has what it is. It is there to try people who have abridged, if you will, various and sundry laws that have been passed. They are brought before the court actually, and that's really known in legal terms as before the bar. And then they're either found guilty or innocent. And then they can't. I apologize for this, keep pulling up here because that kind of interrupts us. But there's not much I can do about it. And then, you know, the people that are involved, there are prosecutors and defending attorneys, and of course the judge who is hearing the case. And then there are juries for these cases, and sometimes a defendant, pardon me, will ask to be tried by a judge or by a panel of judges. In most cases in appellate courts, the defendant does not appear. If the defendant is, or someone has appealed the case, whether it's the defendants or the prosecutor, the defendant does not appear. His or her lawyers appear, and then a team of lawyers for the prosecution appear, and they argue the merits of the case and the reason it's being appealed. And then civil law covers things that are non-criminal acts. This would be personal injury cases not caused by an act of someone. Of course, they could be things that malfeasance or something of that nature. Somebody didn't do something they were supposed to do, but it wasn't the person who caused the injury or the harm. And then we have business law, which covers rules and regulations, if you will, that as the slide here says, provide a legal framework for conducting business. And I think that's probably the best way to say it. It sort of tells you what you can do and what you can't do. We're not getting into legality here as we're talking about something that's been defined by the legislature or a legislative body. We're talking about other things and how we conduct business and things of that nature. Now, yes, some things are codified into law, certainly things that are governed by the Securities and Exchange Commission, which we talked about in Chapter 19, and a few other things. But this talks about the conduct of business, not something that is governed necessarily by federal law. Now, we have three types of law here that are mentioned. The first is statutory law. That is law that is enacted by a legislative body and signed by the executive. That executive signs it into law. And federal government is the president. State government, it is a governor. And then as we move down to cities and counties, and the city, it would be the mayor. If a county has a county commission of some kind, it would be signed by the head of that commission. Whoever that is would be the commissioner who is elected by his or her peers to be the presiding officer of the commission. Common law, on the other hand, is law that is not written. The statutory law is written. Common law has been handed down by courts, and it is, again, not written, or as the slide says here, it's unwritten law. And in precedent, decisions judges have made in previous cases, and that decision or decisions are used to help judges decide the case that is before him or her now. Now, for instance, what happens in the federal court system, if the United States Supreme Court has decided a case in one particular manner, and whether it's for the defendant or for the plaintiff, doesn't make any difference. When a similar case comes before a district court, district federal court, or district or circuit court of appeals, which is just up from the district court, they will often go back. The judges or justices will often go back to what the Supreme Court had to say. Most always do what the Supreme Court had to say in a similar type decision, and use that as part of their decision, their ruling, as a precedent. This has been set. This is what the court has said. This is what the court has held. We did not get into too many federal cases, or actually any federal cases, as we were going through this text. But it's very interesting to note that courts rely on other courts for their decision-making process. And a lot of the law that we have in the United States actually comes to us from English law, English for the majority white people who came to this country. Now, we can argue about what they did and how they did it, things of that nature. But that's a moot point because it's over and done with. But we got a lot of that law from down a very famous jurist by the name of Blackstone. Blackstone. And a lot of his work is still used as precedent. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. Now, within any type of law, especially within the federal government, And then as we move down to state governments, we have administrative agencies who are charged by the various legislative bodies to police certain areas, and they are given authority to act. And here are some that are mentioned here below, different administrative agencies, Federal Reserve, which we just talked about last week. But there's one that I would like to point out to you that is not listed here, and is one that most Americans like to get after, and that's the Internal Revenue Service. Members of Congress like to get after the Internal Revenue Service, but they tend to forget that they gave policing duties to the Internal Revenue Service, which is an arm of the United States Treasury. So we have to stop and think about something. Every time somebody from Congress gets up and rails about what the IRS is doing, the IRS only has reason to act based upon what Congress has told them to do. Now, yeah, we can get after people who are not user-friendly and who do some other things, and that's quite true. And then we can also get after people who are either breaking the rules or bending the rules. But we have to remember that the United States Congress gave each of these agencies listed here and the IRS authority to act. There are 535 members of Congress, 435 in the House and 100 in the Senate. And they don't have enough time to do everything these administrative agencies do. So we have them, we need them. Yes, we can complain about them, and you know, when you get bad service or they're doing something they shouldn't be doing, but we need to tell people that. But we have to remember that they act because Congress gave them authority to act. Tort law. This is when someone has caused an injury or harm to someone else. It also goes on to talk about not only harm to an individual, but to an individual's property and or reputation. As I posted in my lecture notes, and by the way, I don't have them in front of me, on the campus web, reputation is something that's always difficult to prove. And we have a lot of suits in that, usually people who are well known, not necessarily people who are in government or anything like that, but people who are stars and things of that nature continually complain about the people using their name and dragging their names through the mud, various sundry type publications. Reputation is often hard to prove, damage to reputation, and sometimes you'll see these suits, and then other times people just walk away from them and say it's not worth it. Now, there are two types of torts. There's intentional. That's when you mean to do harm to somebody else, somebody else's property, somebody else's reputation. And then the other one comes from negligence. That, notice the term here, it's used as unintentional harm. I guess the classic case of that would be the woman who sued McDonald's because she said the coffee was too hot and opened it and got severe burns. But the package didn't say, the cup didn't say, you know, hot contents, open with care or something else. And she won a rather large judgment against McDonald's. But that's negligence. Now, what comes from this negligence is what we have here known as product liability. Notice that businesses are held liable for harm that a product they manufactured caused harm. Could be design, could be inadequate warning. That's what was in the McDonald's case, and not telling people what to do. Now, for instance, my wife, by the way, this is not getting into product liability, but this is talking about things that inadequate warning. My wife has has complained that she's been allergic to Tylenol for a long period of time, and she would break out in a rash. And she recently saw a physician. She was doing some physical therapy. Physician told her that Tylenol, she was taking, that not to take some other manufacturer of Tylenol, not Tylenol itself, but something, a generic type that's sold in a number of different markets. And so she decided that and he said to her, Tylenol is probably the best for what you need. She has some aches and pains, etc. So she decided to buy regular Tylenol, not store brand type Tylenol. Pardon me. And this morning she woke me up. And I was up. She said, you know, I broke out in a rash. And then she went and got the Tylenol bottle. And on the bottle, and you know, possible side effects, it talks about a rash. She'd never read that before. So that's what I'm talking about, not saying something, and you need to make this what's known as full disclosure. A strict liability, on the other hand, strict product liability is liability without regard to fault. So here's what it says. A company can be held liable for a defective product even when they didn't know the product was defective. So it's something that has to be considered. Now, these are major product liability laws or cases that happen. There's the Ford Motor Company, Jack in the Box, serious problems with the E. coli outbreak, not cooking burgers long enough, General Motors, etc. The Ford Motor Company, this is a little digression here. Ford Motor Company did know that the Pinto was unsafe. That did have the tendency of gasoline tank exploding if there was a rear end collision. Ford Motor Company also knew that there was a part that could be placed around a gas tank that would preclude this, and I can't give you exactly what it is, but some kind of a rubber gasket that cost about $6.50. Don't hold me to $6.50, but somewhere around that amount. Ford decided they did what was known as a cost-benefit analysis, and decided it would be better for them to roll the dice than to recall these cars and put this $6.50 gadget on it. That's a bad term. Product that would help prevent these explosions. And so that's why they wound up paying this $125 million. I think they had some other cases too, but that was a significantly large one. Now, these are some things we get into here: patent, copyright, and trademark. A patent is a protection order, if you will, that is given to an individual or a company that develops a product that's gone through the patent analysis. They apply, company or individual applies for a patent. The government, to the patent office, the government goes through its procedures and decides that yes, a patent is warranted. Once a patent is issued, there's a number that's given to the patent, and the individual or the company has exclusive rights to manufacture that product and sell it for 20 years. After the 20 years is over, the patent is gone. The company cannot apply for an extension of a patent. It does not happen. They could, but it's not going to happen, so they don't do that. A copyright, on the other hand, protects what are known as intellectual properties. Things like books, songs, movies, and things of that nature. And of course, things will go on. It mentions here articles, other types of things. Paintings, I've forgotten about that as well. And normally speaking, a copyright lasts for the life of the person who holds the copyright, his or her life. Sometimes it will be for 50 years, sometimes it will be for 100 years. After that, that will go to the family or to the publisher. And then after a period of time, the copyright no longer exists. If an individual has a copyright, or the publisher still has the copyright, people are limited to how many words they can use without permission. And normally speaking, scholarly papers don't come into that because papers and like for you're writing for me now, a term paper, because that's not going to be published anyplace. But if somebody is going to publish his or her work and they have used this, then they have to get permission from the copyright holder or the copyright holder's heirs or the publisher if they use over so many words. Sometimes it's as few as 50. Sometimes it goes higher than that, so you really just have to check. And then a trademark, we talked a little bit about trademark. We talked more about brand and back in the marketing chapters. This is a symbol that is protected by the government, and it identifies this particular product with the manufacturer. And nobody else can use that particular product, that particular trademark. These are just some facts about patents. What it says there at the top is if you want to apply for a patent, get a lawyer to help you. But I will give you some little bit further advice and get a lawyer who is well versed in patent law. Everyone is not. My dad was a lawyer, and he told a story many years ago of a fellow calling him on the phone and saying he had developed this product and he wanted to get a patent for it, and he wanted to ask my dad's advice, and somebody had steered him to my father. And Dad says, well, I appreciate that, but I'm not a patent lawyer. And he told him to go someplace else. You need to find somebody that knows the intricacies of patent law. You don't have to be a United States citizen to apply for a patent from the United States. Here's the last part. If you own a patent, you may sell it. You don't have to keep it. You can license it, or you can do a few other things. So it doesn't mean that since you're the patent owner that you have to produce a product or something of that nature. This is just a gee whiz slide here I like to talk about occasionally. Companies in the United States and the number of patents that they own. Some are not in the United States. Probably there's 3 of the 5 up here are not in the United States. 1 from Korea and 2 from Japan. Interestingly, Apple is not listed on there. Now we come to part of what governs business law, and that's the Uniform Commercial Code, UCC. Notice what it says here is that it's a comprehensive commercial law that covers things like sales law and other types of commercial laws. There are 11 articles in the UCC. Now, this is something we really need to understand here in business law, and that is warranties. A warranty tells the buyer that the product will do certain things, and it has a certain amount of life, useful life, and that it covers certain type of things as long as the product is used as it's intended to be used. People will sometimes get after companies and say this product doesn't work, et cetera, and then the company does some investigation and finds out, to use a term, somebody played baseball with an electric iron. Well, of course you can't use an electric iron as a bat, and well, you can, but it's no longer covered under warranty. So one of the things a warranty will say to you is as long as it's used as it's intended to be used. There are two types of warranties, expressed and implied. And implied is something that's legally imposed by a government entity on the manufacturer or seller in a particular case. And it says the product's going to conform to whatever it's supposed to do by, let's say, standards of trade. Express is something that the manufacturer or seller has specifically said, this is what this product can and will do. And of course, we, the general public, rely on those when we purchase a product. Negotiable instruments. We're talking here about commercial paper, and this is paper that can be traded for money, if you will. And there are four conditions. It has to be a written document, and it must be made out by the person who intends to make it. In other words, this is what I want to do. I'm the maker of this document. I have to write it up. It must be payable on demand at a specified date. It is payable to the person that holds the negotiable instrument. When I mean holds, I don't mean physically hold it in my hand. It belongs to me. And then it has unconditional promises to pay a specified amount. Now we're going to get into something that's, I think, a little more fun and not quite as boring maybe as some of this other has been, and that's contract. We enter into contracts almost on a continual basis. A contract is something that is an agreement that's entered into by two parties. We'll go through some criteria that they have to meet by two parties. And there's an offer and an acceptance of an offer, which we'll cover a little bit later. Then we have a contract and it is legally enforceable. Most contracts are written, but they don't have to be, as long as there's some of the criteria we're going to bring up make it a contract. And a breach to contract simply says one party or the other decides not to hold up his or her end of the bargain. Any contract is a bargain. And that's why I want to use that word. So we're not going to call this a bargain between two people. We're going to call it a contract between two people that has a bargain in it. Offer and acceptance of an offer. Well, here's where I wanted to get. Sorry, here's where I wanted to go, and I jumped ahead of myself, and I apologize for that. So we say that a contract is legal and it is enforceable when the following criteria are met. There's an offer made, and the offer is accepted voluntarily. Now, voluntarily means there's no coercion, and the person doing this does it because he or she wants to. There's consideration on both parties. One person offers something. Let's say I will offer you this pen, and for the sake of an argument, we'll say this pen is worth $500. So I'll offer to sell you this pen for $500. Or let's do a little bit different. This pen is worth $500, but I'll offer the pen to you for $490. So you're going to get a little bit of a discount. And that offer is accepted by the person that I'm making the offer to. Each of us is able to enter into this contract. That means we're at least of a certain age and we have all of our mental faculties. If somebody is under the influence of alcohol, drugs, are otherwise mentally incapacitated due to illness or injury or something of that nature. There cannot be a contract. The contract covers a legal act. That means what I am selling to you is in my possession. I obtained it legally. I didn't go to a pawn shop and buy something that was stolen, and I knew it was stolen, and I offered it to you for sale. Or I stole this pen from someone else, and I'm offering it to you to make money to do whatever it is that I want to do. And then the contract is in proper form, and that's pretty easy to say here. Proper form just means that, normally speaking, it is written. If you're going to enter into a contract, and the reason I use $500, you get to next. If the product that I want to offer you or sell to you is worth at least $500, the contract has to be written. Now these come with breach contracts. The contract, if a contract is breached, the following may, or a contract member breached, and somebody says, I'm not going to do this. Now this is after contract signed, by the way. Okay. A judge can say, okay, there has to be a specific performance, perhaps payment of damages if that's on, and the discharge of the obligation, which means we're not going to do anything whatsoever. What that means is, if I don't live up to my end, you can drop charges if you want. You don't have to, but of course, you certainly can. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about antitrust law, not a whole lot. This is the Clayton Act of 1914. We had a lot of antitrust legislation that was written around that time, around the turn of the 20th century. We had a lot of large corporations, Standard Oil of New Jersey being one, and a few others, really were restraining trade. They would do certain things in certain nefarious ways to make sure that they were getting what they wanted, and anybody didn't want to play along when we got the short end of the stick. So that's what talks here about exclusive dealing. There couldn't be tying of contracts, and there could not be interlocking directorates. Now, directorates is an old term, and I didn't know a lot about directorates until I read a couple of books about Teddy Roosevelt, and one about Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft. That was a term that was used for some of these business conglomerates years ago, and they would call them directorates. And some of them were interlocking. Even though they were in different businesses, they were interlocking. And so if you did business with one part, you had to do business with another part. Antitrust legislation, we had the beginnings of the Federal Trade Commission in 1914. It's there to investigate unfair trade practices and to make sure they don't happen. The Wheeler-Lee Amendment, 1938, gave the FTC additional control over false and misleading advertising. And then the Robinson-Patman Act of 1936 prohibits price discrimination. And that, by the way, applies to both buyers and sellers. These are high-profile antitrust suits. Standard Oil of New Jersey that I mentioned, 1911, United States versus American Tobacco Company, and the latest, well, the two, U.S. versus AT&T, 1982, when American Telephone and Telegraph was broken apart, and AT&T had to get rid of a number of their regional companies and a few other things. And then the United States versus Microsoft in 2000, Microsoft was charged with being a monopoly. We do have consumer protections. There has been a lot of complaint about that from some members of Congress that it goes too far. The Dodd-Frank Act, which was to help clean up banks and the banking industry following the banking turmoil that we had that started in late 2007, 2008, created this Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is an agency running in the United States government, which has a lot of complaint to it because they say it gives, some people don't like it, say it gives consumers too much power. Others say consumers don't have enough power. These are identity theft complaints. I'm not going to discuss that a whole lot. Taxes. Taxes are one of the ways that governments can raise money. Another one is to print money, which is not a very good idea. And then they can collect other things, taxes from things like protective tariffs and things like that, which actually, as we know, are forms of taxes. So we have income tax, property tax, excise tax, sales tax, etc. And this is just another gee whiz slide. This is what's known as sin tax, how much it costs to buy a pack of cigarettes in various localities in the United States. Question here we hear all the time is, do the rich pay taxes? In fact, they do. And it's something that we have a lot of complaint about, but it continues. Bankruptcy laws are there to do two things. They're there to protect, in some cases, an individual who has, for some reason or other, come into bad financial straits and unable to meet what they're supposed to meet. 3 kinds of bankruptcies. Chapter 7, that's what most individuals file. Chapter 11 is reorganization, that's for companies. And Chapter 13 sets up a repayment plan. This is Chapter 7. It just goes through how claims are paid. I'm not going to go through that with you. This is explained very well in the book, and you can follow that. This particular slide shows it. And again, I'm not going to go through. These are various companies that have filed bankruptcy and are now no longer in business. And then we have deregulation laws. The one probably that most people know that have affected them the most is airline deregulation. We have a lot of airlines that are no longer around. Eastern Airlines, Ozark Airlines, TWA, big airlines, Pan American, and Pan American probably didn't get hit as much by deregulation as it got hit partially by deregulation and then more fully by the large loss of life over Lockerbie, Scotland back in the late 1980s, which we know was a criminal act fostered by the Libyan government. Telecommunication to some extent as well. And this gives you hamburger regulations. You can see this in the text on page, I'm getting there for you, on page A18. Well, at 5:15, that brings us to the end of the bonus chapter A. We'll take a short break till 5:20, and we'll come back and discuss bonus chapter B, bonus chapter C, managing risk. Please come back at 5:20. Thank you. All right, we're back. Bonus chapter C, managing risk. Uh, and these are the learning goals for this chapter. Identify the environmental changes that have made risk management important. Explain the 4 ways of managing risk and distinguish between insurable and uninsurable risk. Define insurance policies and explain the law of large numbers and the rule of indemnity. And finally, discuss the various types of insurance business can buy to manage risk. I just want to say at the outset here, this chapter and the bonus chapter D are not long, and so I probably will not take a break between these. Here we talk about enterprise risk management. And what I'd like to tell you here is this is a program, but you don't have to have a program to manage risk. What you have to have is an understanding of risk, what risk can do to you or to your company, sole proprietor or proprietor, a small company or a small partnership, etc. And then what you have to do to ameliorate that risk. Do something to make sure that you're not going to get caught up in risk. So here is what is risk? Pretty simple to explain. It's a chance of loss. Not only is it a chance of loss, but it is the degree of probability of loss. And then it continues with what is it going to cost us if we do have loss. Now, there's 2 kinds of risk. There's speculative and pure. Speculative means there's a chance of doing well or not doing well. And pure risk means you haven't got a chance at all. Everything you do here with this particular adventure is going to wind up with a loss and no chance to get any of your money back or your investment back. Now, what can we do to deal with pure risk? Well, I don't like the first one because it says reduce the risk. Well, remember, if it's pure risk, we're going to lose. So all you're doing here is if you're reducing it, you're reducing the amount of money you're going to lose. Understanding that no matter what you do, you're still going to lose money. Avoid the risk is probably a good idea here because you're going to be in bad shape no matter what you do. So don't get started. Just stay away from it. Self-insurance, the risk, that means you're setting aside money to handle the loss that you know is coming. Remember, it's a pure risk. We're going to lose. And then we could go and buy insurance to cover that potential loss. Now, there's a downside to that. And the downside to that is, well, we know that if there's going to be loss here, how is it any insurance company is going to give us money to or sell us a policy? Now, they may sell you the policy, but you understand that you're going to pay an awful lot of money. Now, these are disasters, but not one of these disasters. Well, I'll come back. All of these disasters, with the possible exception of one, could not be avoided. These are human things, etc. Now, they are not human things; they're acts of nature. In some cases, you cannot get insurance for these things. Earthquake is not preventable. You can certainly build structures that withstand earthquake or will do well enough that they're not going to fall apart. And of course, you really have to be careful about building an earthquake country. There is some notional thought processes that had we connected the dots, I'm talking about the United States federal government, had we connected the dots, we could have prevented the attacks that occurred September 11th, 2001. I don't know how true that is, but there does seem to be an amount of evidence that said that, yeah, maybe if we'd have paid attention, we could have done that. Well, let's ask you what self-insurance is. We kind of already explained that. You're setting aside funds to cover the potential loss of risk. Notice that some companies do what's known as called going bare, and they're going to pay the claims out of their own pockets. Or notice that there are special funds set up to cover claims. There's a plus and a minus to that. The plus is that it's not costing you, and you're rolling the dice to say, well, maybe this isn't going to happen. But the downside to that is, well, if it does happen, you could possibly be bankrupted by the amount of money you had to pay out. So you really have to stop and think about. Well, you have to do a risk analysis, and so make sure that you're doing that. Uninsurable risks, no insurance company is going to cover. And by the way, some companies will not cover flood damage. Some will not sell you flood insurance. Some won't sell insurance for hurricanes, and this is a big problem because we have a huge portion of our population in the United States that lives in hurricane territory. Yeah, I'm talking about the coasts. I'm not talking about stuff that comes inland that causes problems. Hurricanes spin off tornadoes and things of that nature, severe thunderstorms, etc. Obviously, market risk, political risks, personal risk, and then operational risk. Here are the types of risks that are insurable. One of the things it says here is a loss must be measurable. So that's pretty easy. And then, if you insure your home against a fire, you know what the cost of the home is. Or if you don't know what the cost of the home is, obviously you know what you paid for it. But you can also go to your accounting and find out what the assessed value is. Notice the loss has to be accidental. If you set fire to your house to cover, get the amount that would cost to rebuild a house paid for the insurance company, and they find out you did that, of course, side effect, you're going to go to jail. They're not going to pay it. Notice that not only must the loss be measurable, but the chance of loss must be measurable. And that's where insurance companies get in. They have actuaries that determine what the chances of these things happening are. And then the insurance company decides whether it wants to take that on or not. And then they go through the process of further insuring themselves by dispersing this type of risk to other companies. You can buy, you can buy insurance policies. That's a contract. We talked about that before. You enter into an agreement with the insurance company, and you say to the insurance company, I will pay you this premium, whatever it is you're charging me, and you'll insure me against the potential of this risk. And that's where we talk here. That's what pay. That's what's known as the premium. And then if there is an issue, fire or some other type of damage, there's a claim. You submit a claim to the insurance company, and they'll send somebody out to investigate what happened and say, yeah, okay, we're going to pay the damage, or we're not going to pay the damage, or here's what we're going to pay, and this is how we're going to go to you. A couple of different types of insurance companies. We really don't have to pay a lot of attention to that. One is a stock insurance company. It's owned by stockholders, and they may or may not pay dividends. A mutual insurance company, on the other hand, is owned by the policy owners. Policyholders, better way to say it, I guess. In this particular slide, just gives you an idea of which are stock companies and which are mutual companies. Health insurance is another big issue. We know that there have been a lot of changes due to the Affordable Care Act. And of course, as you well know, there are pluses and minuses about that. It seems to be there's nobody on the fence with this. They're either for it or against it. But we're going to continue to see, regardless, we're going to continue to see major changes in the health insurance industry simply because there's a lot of money spent here. And the fact of the matter is, I'm not going to talk too much about health insurance here. The fact of the matter is, we have very costly health care in this country, and yet we cannot say that our health care, or excuse me, I'll put it this way, the health care delivered by healthcare professionals, and that includes physicians and other folks in hospitals and things of that nature, is any better is any better than some other countries that are European countries or Canada or something else. We pay an enormous amount of money in healthcare for insurance and things of that nature, and yet we cannot determine that our healthcare is better than many other countries, and that's something we really have to stop and think about. We have to get this animal under wraps so that we're delivering what we claim we can deliver. These are different. I'm not going to go over this too much. The different types of health insurance options, health maintenance organization, preferred provider organization, and health savings accounts. Health savings accounts you can only get through your employer, and it's a good thing to do because this is like a cafeteria type thing that you can choose a benefit. And if you get this savings account, notice that it's tax-deferred savings account. One of the things, however, look at that at the bottom. It's lower cost, but they're high deductible. It means you're going to pay a large amount of money out of your pocket. Something like this for a young person who is healthy may be a good thing to do. That was one of the things that the Affordable Care Act wanted to do or needed to do, because it's trying to spread the risk, if you will, across a broad spectrum of people, get enough young people to enter into the market so that we can keep the prices low. It does seem to be working to some extent. I am not into that business, and I can't tell you how well. But I can tell you it's something you ought to investigate. It may be to your benefit. It may not be to your benefit. I don't know that, but it's something you ought to investigate. Other types of insurance, your disability insurance. Obviously, you can buy that from your insurance company. Some places you can get it through your employer. Something that will help you, tide you over if you cannot work. Normally speaking, these policies do not cover 100%, but they give a certain percent of what your income would be had you not been incapacitated in some for some reason. Workers' compensation is not something that you can buy. Workers' compensation you get through your company, and if you're injured on the job, then there's a fund that kicks in. Individuals do not pay into workers' compensation. Companies pay into workers' compensation. Getting the most out of your life insurance. A lot of this figure talks about, first of all, it talks about healthy lifestyle. If you don't smoke, good. If you do smoke, think about stopping. I'm a former smoker. I haven't smoked for a great number of years, and I've always been thankful that I quit. If you're getting into insurance, figure out how much that you need. A good way to get insurance, especially if you're a young person, you want to cover a family, is what's known as term insurance. A lot of insurance companies don't like that, but term insurance is usually low cost, and you get a good amount of coverage for a specified number of years. And so for a younger person, it may be better for you to buy term insurance. Again, the cost is lower, and you can get usually a good amount of insurance for a reasonable amount of money. It may not be. So, but investigate what's best for you. Make sure you buy from a reputable company. And then what it talks to you down here about is finding a good financial planner. Many banks have financial planners. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the bank has all the answers or that financial planner has all the answers. What I'm saying to you is that's a good place to start. Find out if there's a financial planner there, and you can sit down and talk to them. Do a little of your own homework. You can do it at libraries and online and things of that nature. The only thing I tell you about the online sources is make sure it's a reputable source. Don't get into something simply because this says I have all the answers. A few of us do. Liability insurance is normally seen by folks who are in professions, medical profession, legal profession, dental profession, something of that nature. Notice it's also known as malpractice insurance. That type of liability insurance can be very expensive. I have a friend of mine who's a physician, and he's retired now, but one of the reasons he was an anesthesiologist. And one of the reasons that he got out of that, decided to retire, was he felt he could no longer afford the premiums. So I just pass that along to you. Not trying to scare anybody who's in a profession, but it is something that you need to know. Product liability insurance, certainly companies would think about doing that. And again, that's just trying to make sure your losses are covered as doing some kind of a risk aversion analysis. Home-based businesses, I know some of you may have something like this or consider having something like this. It is different than homeowners insurance. If you have a business in your home, many times homeowners insurance won't cover loss. Talk to your insurance carrier and find out, and get the insurance if you need it, etc. And this last one is know about your home. Make sure that the policy covers what you want it to cover. Don't overbuy. Watch the small claims. If you continue to put in small claims, the next time it comes around to renew your policy, you may find out that your insurance is going up. So small claims, if they're reasonable and you can do them out of pocket, that's a way to think about it. That's the self-insurance part. And then know about your home's history. When it was built, how long it was built ago, how long ago it was built, maybe the type of construction material that was used, et cetera, et cetera. An insurance person can help you with that, but it's always better if you know it as well, so you know what's going on. And as I said, this particular chapter would not be long, and we are not going to take a break. We'll now go to bonus chapter D, and we should spend just about the same amount of time, about 20 minutes or so, talking about managing personal finance. And the learning goals for this chapter look at the 6 steps for controlling your assets, explain how to build a financial base, including investing in real estate, saving money, and managing credit, explain how buying the appropriate insurance can protect your financial base, and then finally outline a strategy for retiring with enough money to last the remainder of your life. Now, this starts us off by talking about an investment in education. And I cannot overemphasize that, not just because I happen to be in the business. It is something that we all know. A typical full-time worker with a 4-year degree earns about $50,000 a year 62% more than a person with a high school degree. Now, of course, there's a bridge in there, a person who has a two-year degree. So see, here's what the lifetime earnings would be versus say someone with a high school education, and what it amounts to is about $1.6 million more. That's something we think about because we get paid on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, and then figure it out what it is for the year. We don't do that next multiplication factor. Another reason is because as we change the way we operate today, you really have to know some things that you're not going to learn in high school, and that you may not learn in a technical or vocational school. So it just behooves you to get as much education as you possibly can. And of course, that broadens your horizons and makes you a more rounded person. These are 6 steps to take control of your finances. And none of them are magic, but it's something you need to follow. You need to know what your assets are. And assets include not only money in banks, savings accounts, certificates of deposit, stocks and bonds if you have some, but it is your home, your automobiles, jewelry, and things of that nature. Our nemesis is kicking up here again, so we'll try to get rid of that, get back to where we need. Know how much you spend. Years ago, when I was in the Army, we used to have continual fights with young soldiers. And fights is not a good word. Continual counselings with young soldiers about how much they spent. And they would say, well, the TV's only, like this or something different. My rent is only $200 a month if they lived off the installation. And my car is only $100 a month, and then all the rest of the stuff. And so they get to where they were, say, $600 or $700 a month. And you'd say, well, you have to stop and think about this because you only earn after taxes $500 a month. And so, you're spending $200 more than what you have every month. And then they would come back and say, no, this is only so much a month, and that's only so much. We'd say, no, wait a minute. You have to add all that up. So that's what this is talking about. Know how much you spend on a monthly basis. And of course, then that's easy. You can multiply that by 12. Establish a budget. Now, one thing I like to always say about establishing a budget is it doesn't mean that you have to rigorously live within the budget. There are times when you say, I'm able to go outside this budget this time. I won't do it next month. And that's okay. The budget gives you a plan to follow. If you have any debt that you can pay off, pay it off. I talk about credit card debt. And the fact of the matter is, if you have $1,000 on a credit card, if you have that debt, $1,000 on a credit card, and you only pay the minimum due each month, it'll take you more than 8 years to pay that off. Start saving. And then finally, borrow only to buy assets that will increase in the future. That would be like buying a home. Now, it's not always true that homes always appreciate, but the general rule is that they do. So that's what that's talking about. Conversely, when you're buying a car, let's just say it's a brand new car. A car depreciates about 50% the minute you drive it off the lot. So that's not going to get you extra money. Now, yeah, if you own an antique car, there is the possibility that that investment will increase. But that is based upon somebody wanting to buy that car. And there are not all that many car enthusiasts running around, where there's a heck of a lot more people wanting to buy a house. Household budget, this is what they include. Your mortgage or your rent monthly, what you have to pay for necessities, food and clothing, utilities, which would be your cable TV and your phone and gas and electric and things of that nature. I got some of that down here at the bottom already. How much you want to insure your property for, if you do, and then other expenses. Now, other expenses sometimes are known, sometimes they're not. Some that would be known would be if you have children and you know that you have expenses for school, and they'll come up, every August or September, and you can plan for those. This just gives you some kind of alternatives and how much you could save. I'm not going to get into this, but you could go to Old Navy instead of Banana Republic and save 24 bucks on a shirt. Think about those things. Of course, Old Navy probably is not going to make the same statement that Banana Republic is, but then you have to stop and think about what your value is. These are, notice the term easy-ish, which means that they may be easy and maybe they're not. Cut back on things that you don't absolutely have to have when you go to the grocery store, supermarket. And one of the best things is to have a little something to eat before you go to shop. People who are hungry spend more money at the supermarket. Eliminate cell phones. Maybe you might want to think about cell phone usage. Maybe you might want to think about a different carrier. Cut out cable television. That's almost difficult to do today. I could do it. The only thing I would miss would be the sports programs. I'm not saying that's the right thing to do. I'm just saying that's something that I could do. But you really have to stop and think about what you're doing when you do something like that. Don't go out so often. And then cut out the clutter in your house, which means you're not buying as much stuff. And then if you cut down on the clutter, you're not also maybe having to heat extra things in your house, so your utility bill will go down. These are just what millionaires do. Most of us are not in that category, so I'm not going to continue with that. Now, here's a way to build your financial base. Pardon me. What this first one says is live as inexpensively as you can. Some people don't like the term frugal. I think the term frugal is okay. That is better than cheap. And what it does say here is if both you and your spouse work, try to live on one salary and invest the other salary. Think about moving into a lower priced home that's up for sale. I realize people are concerned about neighborhoods and things like that, and I'm not going to try and tell you to go someplace where you wouldn't live, but you can find places, and it can help you save, because hopefully your home would appreciate over a certain number of years, and you would earn a profit when you sell it. One rule of thumb is, for the most part, to not follow through all the time, but for the most part, if you decide to buy a home as an investment, you should hold it for at least 3 years before you decide to sell. And then it talks here about buying for the long term. It goes with houses. It goes with investing, especially if you get into the stock market. Hold it for the long term. Don't try to sell it. And then obviously don't live beyond your means. Don't try to keep up with the Joneses, as the old saying years ago. I'll give you an example of this, and I don't mind using personal things. My wife and I have a number of mutual funds, and we bought a mutual fund, I guess about 25 years ago, and maybe a little bit less than that, but about 25 years ago, sometime in the early 90s. And almost immediately, the value of the mutual fund went down 25 cents a share, and then about the investment that we put in, that was significant. And I found that out because I happened to call my wife when I was in Texas on military business, and I happened to call my wife, and she told me about it. So, well, let's not panic about it. Just let it alone, and we'll continue to do monthly investments and whatsoever. Well, long story short is that's turned out to be one of the best mutual funds we own. And it's just that, I felt like it was something we needed to do. And of course, if you're younger, as we mentioned before last week, you can take greater risks. If you're not as young, you want to make sure your risks are not more than what you can handle. This slide talks about 5 rules of frugality, and I think the first one is most important. Don't give up what you like. You need that, but cut back on things that you don't need. Cut back on things that are wants and not needs. Look for ways to reduce your outlay. That it's not something that you have to do. Those here never go shopping without knowing what you want. And I like to say that happens to difference between men and women. I don't mean this to be a gender bias type thing. I tell my wife this all the time. Women tend to be shoppers, and men tend to be buyers. And, men tend to have an idea of what they want to buy, and then they buy it. Now, that doesn't mean that they're doing a good job here. Maybe they haven't done any comparison pricing, etc. But that's what this talks about. Do comparison pricing. And you can do a lot of that online today. You don't even have to leave your home. And that's what this next one says. Look for the best deal you possibly can get. These are benefits from buying a home. It's an investment, usually speaking. It does force you to save money. What you pay in interest is tax deductible. It comes off your income tax the following year. And then, of course, the key to any home and being able to resell the home for a nice profit revolves around 3 things: location, location, location. And that's always important to think about. This just talks about how much home you can afford, what your annual income is, and what your monthly payment would be. Interest rates are low today. You want to take advantage of them. They will probably start going up sometime this year. I expect definitely it will go up sometime next year. I think this first piece of advice is talking about buying stock. Don't buy stock simply because everybody else is buying stock. The old key to the stock market is to buy low and sell high. Well, that's not easy to do. And most of us don't have sufficient funds to make a stock move in a certain direction so we can gain a profit of it. Yeah, there are people that get in at the bottom, they know somebody, etc. And I understand that that's true, but doesn't happen to most of us. Now, if you get in the stock market, for the long haul, and make sure you can tolerate the risk. If you can't tolerate the risk, then don't get in the stock market. You have to be careful about using credit cards. You are borrowing money when you use a credit card. And when you sign that slip, you're telling the credit card issuer, I'm going to pay you back what I owe you. And if you pay it back in the reasonable time or the right amount of time, you don't owe them any money other than what you purchased something. You pay $40 for something, and you pay the bill when it comes due. You pay them $40. You don't pay anything extra. But what credit card companies have done now is they have shortened the time, and once you have to send your remuneration in. It used to be you got like a whole month. It's down to 20 days or less now. Be careful about that. Just don't take on more credit than what you can pay for. And this is talking here is exactly what I've said. Only 17% report paying off their balance each month. And, you know, I've been with a credit card company, a particular credit card company, for more than 30 years. And I pay a membership fee for that every year, and I've had a very, very good relationship with this company. But I continually get, my wife and I pay that credit card bill when it's due. We continually get solicitation for, you can pay so much this month and so much next month, etc. Best advice is, if you have trouble managing credit, don't get a credit card. Of course, you know, if you turn your credit card in, that will do some damage to your credit standing. I don't understand exactly how they do that, but they do. So you'd just be better off just taking the card and keeping the card and not using it. I have a couple of credit cards that I do that with. It's not something I want to use, but I've gotten from making some purchases, etc. And I still have them, but I don't use them. And then if you're going to have some issues with it, just don't get a credit card. You're just better off. And you know, you just need to understand that. And that's not any slamming anybody. It's just, you know, don't get a credit card just because. Get it because you need it, and you'll use it, and you'll pay that credit card bill off when it comes due. Of course, we do have credit card issues. Credit Card Act and does protect you from exorbitant fees. Somebody steals your credit card, you only pay the first $50. You don't pay any more than that. But make sure that you know what that is. This is our credit card debt in the United States, and it's not a pretty picture. And of course, that's a cumulative thing, but it is high. Credit scores, know your credit score. Do whatever you can to keep your credit score high, and even increase it. Now, this is back to insuring your life. You know, we talked a little bit about this the last session, and managing risk. And this is simply the same type thing as term insurance, whole life insurance, and variable life insurance. What you need to do here, and I'm not going to go through this again, what you need to do is you need to determine for yourself, and if you're married, your spouse, what it is you need to insure. Now, you know, if you stop and think about this, you and the insurance company are in a betting game. Yeah, you're betting you're going to die so you can get this off, and the insurance company's betting you're not going to die. And so don't get into that game. You can use some insurance policies as a savings plan. I'm not here to recommend that. I'm not here to not recommend it, but it is a way you can do that. Find out if it's something you want to do. The amount that you're going to get increasing on that whole life. Notice it, whole life combines pure insurance with savings. Your savings rate, the rate of interest is not that high, but it is a pretty good rate of interest based upon what banks are giving you today. So it's something you may want to look at. It may pay off for you. Just understand that you have to find out what the payoff is, and you know how much money you lose if you cash in early, and things of that nature. It's a plus and minus thing. It's like balancing your checkbook. You just have to find out what's best for you. You can purchase annuities. That's another thing. Many of them come through insurance companies. Again, you need to find out what it is, what's best for you, what it's going to cost you, how long your money is going to be tied up, what the payoff is at the end of the time. Here we're talking about health care again. Again, it's something you really need to stop and think about your health care, about who pays for it, about what it is that you want to get. And this is where your money goes. Uh, and I'm not going to go any place with that, just something to tell you. These are health savings accounts. For the for the most part, we talked about HSAs in the last hour. Health savings accounts come through your employer. There may be a way a person who's a sole proprietor can get these. I don't know that. Something that you are, you may want to find out if you're eligible for that. Plans can be costly, as we said in the last hour, and don't jump on them just because everybody else is. Find out if it's something that you want to use, and if it's a benefit for you. If it is, do some investigation. If it's not, then don't. Social Security Act came in 1935, known as the Old Age Survivors Disability Insurance Program. Was never meant to be a retirement program. And of course, when it was originally set up, people didn't live as long. People are living a lot longer today, and that's causing some problems with Social Security fund. We pay 6.2% of our salary to Social Security, and then that's matched by an employer, 6.2%. If you're a sole proprietor, you pay double. You pay 6.2 plus 6.2. Individual retirement accounts, the good things to have. We've talked a little bit about this in the chapters on financial planning, chapter 19. These are the regular ones are tax deferred, which means you don't pay any tax now while you're contributing, but you do pay tax when you take it out. You cannot take money out of an IRA without penalty until age 59 and a half. You must take it out at age 70 and a half. 401k is normally an individual retirement account. If you work for a nonprofit, it's known as 403b. Of course, you can set them up on your own if you're an individual sole proprietor. Those are known as Kehoe plans. Same general premise. If you own a Roth IRA, or if you're considering a Roth IRA, you do not get an upfront tax deduction, but you do not ever pay anything when you take the money out. And of course, the money grows without paying taxes. 401k is like an IRA. They are sponsored by employers. The only thing that I will tell you, the biggest provision I will give you here is that many employers try to steer you into their stock. For instance, if you work for Procter & Gamble, there was a big lawsuit. Procter & Gamble, people who retired from Procter & Gamble were drawing a pension. Got upset a couple of years ago when the stock price went down. I mean, they lost value. And they went to court, and they didn't get much satisfaction from the court. Because it's at the vagaries of the market, which we talked about before. You don't get any insurance from that the same way. But 401k, let's just set aside predetermined, I'm going to get this way, pre-tax dollars. So it comes off the gross amount that you earn, and then your tax is lowered. So $1,000, and you say, okay, I'm going to put $100 away in a 401k every month. You're taxed on $900, not the $1,000. That's not a lot of money, I know, but I wanted to make it such an easy thing for us to translate in our minds. What I was going to say to you before, and I sidetracked myself, many companies will try to get you to load up on their stock and a 401k plan. Be very careful about that. I'm not telling you don't do that, but if you keep loading up on that stock, then you have nothing else. And it's better to have a diversified savings plan that talks about a passbook savings account at a bank, and maybe some certificates of deposit, maybe some bonds, and maybe some stocks. And so 401k plan, you don't want to just buy all of the employer's stock. Now, I'll give you the classic example. That was the fellow I heard about that the day before Enron imploded in 2001, he had a stock portfolio through the company worth about $1.4 million. The day after they imploded, it was worth $13,000. So he just loaded up on company stock. Now that's a disaster story, but the moral of that story is diversify. Don't put everything in one place. And then here's the benefits of 401k plans, just like an IRA. You contribute to reduce your tax now. You continue to earn money and it's not taxed. Some employers will match your contributions up to a certain dollar amount or a certain percentage. It's the Kehoe plan for self-employed people, very similar to IRAs or 401ks. And the plans are similar. Something if you're going to do, talk to a financial planner to do that. And then you have to have some kind of plan. None of us are going to be here for the duration, even though we may think we are going to be. So you need to find out or decide who is going to get assets that you're going to leave. I would tell you to document who you want to have certain things now. Or if you want to wait a few years, do it then. Because you get into some kind of jackpot. I have an elderly cousin, and I am her power of attorney, and I will be the executor of the will. And we keep telling her, she has a number of valuable paintings. You should designate who you want to get these particular paintings. Because if that doesn't happen, then everything belongs to the estate. And people who think they're going to get something aren't going to get anything. Yeah, they can buy it from the estate for what it's worth, but then they're paying for something they didn't expect to have to pay for. So if you're going to do that, have a will, designate things to people while you're still in a good frame of mind, etc., and don't cause any ill will when you no longer around. And then finally, you should appoint an executor of the will, and that just keeps you out of problems because that person has a lot of work to do. Has to file the estate, and has to pay taxes that their taxes due, and distribute the estate, etc., etc. So this is something to think about. Anyway, as I mentioned, we would only spend about an hour and a half tonight. We're just a little bit over that. So I thank you for your time. Again, the lecture will be uploaded tomorrow. I have enjoyed working with each of you in this course, and look forward to perhaps having you in another course sometime in the future. Thank you, and good night.